Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Jackie Topol, and I'm here with my colleague, Kristy Del Coro. For those of you who don't know us, we are both registered dietitians and culinary nutritionists. We are the co-founders of the Culinary Nutrition Collaborative, where we offer culinary-focused continuing education to translate the nutrition science in the kitchen. We started our first annual conference in 2017 and have grown to offering primarily virtual events year-round to thousands of dietitians nationwide. We're thrilled to be joined today by our colleague Maggie Moon, who we'll introduce in a moment, and we're grateful to California Prunes for their support of today's webinar. Our mission is for dietitians to gain more confidence in the kitchen while also sharing evidence-based information with your respective audiences, whether that's through a cooking demo, recipe, blog post, speaking engagement, or in your counseling. Please be sure to keep yourself muted and be mindful not to accidentally share your screen. We encourage you all to use the chat box for questions or comments, and we'll address them as soon as we can. You're welcome to put your video on as you can see your colleagues, and we can see who will be cooking with us later. And lastly, for the best viewing experience, please select speaker view and not gallery view on your Zoom. After today's webinar, we'll be sharing a link to a short survey, and when you complete this, you'll be able to download your CEU certificate. Within 1 week, we'll share the recording of the webinar and we'll be sending it to all registrants. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to email us at info@culinarynutritioncollaborative.com.
And now, excuse me, I'm Kristy Del Coro, Jackie's co-founder for the Culinary Nutrition Collaborative. And now, without further ado, we're going to begin the educational portion of our webinar and introduce our very special guest, Maggie Moon. We've had the pleasure of working with Maggie in many different capacities over the years, probably over the past decade, it's hard to believe. And we're so happy that she's here as our featured speaker today. Maggie Moon, if you don't already know her, is a registered dietitian. She's an award-winning nutritionist specializing in brain health. She is a Columbia University educated, culinary school trained registered dietitian with clinical training from top-ranked New York Presbyterian Hospital of Columbia and Cornell universities. She has consulted with government agencies, national nonprofits, and global brands. She is lead author of the Neurologic Disorders chapter in Krauss and Mahan's Food and the Nutrition Care Process. She authored the Brain Health chapter in the Culinary Medicine textbook, a comprehensive guide for community health initiatives. And her book, The Mind Diet, offers practical nutrition solutions to enhance cognitive resilience. And actually, the second edition of The Mind Diet is available for pre-sale now. We'll put a link in the chat box so you can check that out. Maggie has shared her expertise on stage at international conferences, in TV interviews, and through publications such as Eating Well, Good Housekeeping, Mind Body Green, Men's Health, Prevention, Real Simple, Well and Good, Women's Health, Yahoo, and more. She is based in Los Angeles, where she enjoys hiking with her husband, cooking with her octogenarian mom, creating content for her Instagram account at Mind Diet. Thank you, Maggie. I'll let you take it from here. I'm just going to spotlight you. And if we could go to the next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Jackie and Kristy, and thank you all for being here today. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about the power of prunes and their role in women's wellness. So first, some important disclosures. This presentation is funded by the California Prune Board. I am a paid consultant for the California Prune Board and have been compensated for this presentation. I was accidentally muted, excuse me. And there are no other relevant disclosures for the Culinary Nutrition Collaborative, nor myself at this time. Next slide, please. So here's where we're going today. Here are our learning objectives. We're going to cover the basics of the composition in prunes and how that will lead to the potential benefits for women's wellness. And then we're going to review the science, take a look at the evidence for why to incorporate rather prunes into women's wellness diets. And then we'll get into some fun stuff with practical tips, lifestyle strategies, where to include prunes throughout the day in meals, along with a culinary demo that's going to be so great and so fun, techniques and recipes for you to bring it all to life, to bring it to the plate. Next slide, please. So this is a big picture look at the pillars of women's health. And what is so interesting to me about these pillars of women's health is that they are the same 6 pillars of brain health that are globally recognized. And so what I like to point out is it is so nice to see that nutrition is a fundamental piece of this answer. It is essential, it's a cornerstone, while also acknowledging that it is one piece, one very important piece, but one piece of the puzzle that comes together to form the full picture of women's health. And so today, of course, we are focusing on the nutrition piece, which is so important. And at this time, this is the only time that I'll be acknowledging the other aspects. I just want to quickly remind this group that we also want to be thinking about movement, and I'd like to advocate for joyful movement here, as well as high quality, consistent, restorative sleep, mental health, and addressing mental health concerns with compassion, as well as finding ways to manage stress in our lives is going to be so important to our health and our well-being. And then nourishing those meaningful connections with others to make those social connections that really enrich our lives. And last but not least, engaging the brain. Though the brain is not a muscle, like muscles, it's a bit of a use it or lose it situation. So we all want to make sure that we're engaging our brains throughout our lifespan, which is great because you can check that off the list. That is what we are doing here today. Great, so next slide. So this slide is an array of women's health concerns that you'll see here. And I want to point out a few things that are unique to women. So we know that women live longer than men on average, but at the same time, we spend more of our lives in poorer health and also with more chronic disease. And so I just want to go left to right from the bottom left around to share some of these topics that should be top of mind as we're thinking about the health of the women in our lives and our clients and our communities. So we all know that heart disease is the leading cause of death amongst women, and yet surveys show that women are actually more concerned about dying from cancer and breast cancer specifically. Now, of course, these are all very valid concerns, but perhaps we should be paying more attention to heart disease than we have been. Joint health and bone health are also quite important for women's health and quite unique. As we get older, 20% of us over the age of 50 have osteoporosis. Now, in that same age group, it's only 4.4% of men. Certain cancers and diabetes, the risk goes up dramatically after menopause. So that's something important to keep in mind. Cognitive changes are also a big shift that happens as we age. For some of us, it may come on with pregnancy. For others, it may start in our 40s. So overall in America, 1 in 9 adults over the age of 45, not 65, but 45, are living with subjective cognitive decline, which is a new designation that means that you have noticed some memory challenges that have gotten worse over the last 12 months. So it is affecting your daily life. And then, of course, as we become older than 65 and beyond, the risk for other cognitive decline changes becomes greater. And for women in particular, this is often catalyzed by some of the changes that are happening with perimenopause and menopause. Now, as we get older as well, it becomes harder to keep on lean muscle mass, which makes weight maintenance a challenge. When it comes to eye health, age-related macular degeneration is actually higher. The prevalence is higher in women. 2 out of 3 cases are women. We've touched on menopause a little bit already. And in fact, I think that's a great example of how these conditions often interplay and often build on each other, either in poor ways or positive ways. If we're addressing one thing, we can kind of address multiple concerns and vice versa. When it comes to energy and fatigue, what I found interesting is in the data, and perhaps in real life, I have seen that women actually fatigue less easily than men. So we don't fatigue as easily. However, it does take us longer to recover, and that can be exacerbated by hormonal shifts as well. So that's something that we need to manage. For sleep concerns across the lifespan, women are more affected by insomnia in general, perhaps secondary to greater risks for depression and anxiety, which leads into mental health concerns. So women are at greater risk for stress, anxiety, and depression, which are the top 3 mental health concerns that lead to disability. Next slide, please. I wanted to get off that slide as soon as possible because I know that that was a lot of negative news, and it was a lot to hear, and it was a lot to say and think about for the women in our lives that we are counseling and that are important to us. But I think that it's really great that nutrition has a role to play to address a lot of those concerns. So our patients aren't powerless, and there's certainly things that they can do. So what is a nutritious food that can do something about those things? Well, today we're talking about prunes and California prunes in particular, and what makes them so special. So what is a prune? If you want, you can answer in the chat. If you just go back a second to the prior slide, thank you so much. So what is a prune? And if you answered it's a dried plum, you are correct. I will venture a guess that all of us on this Zoom today understand that prunes are dried plums, but you might be surprised that some consumers don't yet realize that. And so it is worthwhile to cover the basics to help them be a little more connected to understanding what they eat and where it comes from. And so prunes are actually from a specific variety of plum called the improved French variety. It comes from the Petit Dijon variety. And it was chosen because it produces the best quality prune. And it's grown in California because not only are there ideal growing conditions in California, which perhaps some of you may know, but also there's a real energy and a real environment of innovation, technology, and sustainability standards that drives processors and growers to create really safe and high quality produce in this state. And those growers and processors have been doing this for a long time, over 100 years. So multiple generations where they've been really honing their craft. And nearly all the prunes, by the way, if you're worried about where do I get my California prunes, nearly all the prunes in the United States do come from California. And then also we share that with about 60 other countries worldwide. Next slide, please. So prune health benefits really cover so much ground when it comes to women's health concerns, particularly in these topics around gut health, satiety and weight management, bone health, heart health, and brain health. So let's get into it. Next slide, please. So when we're talking to consumers, they might want to understand what is in a serving of prunes. So first things first, what is a serving? That's going to be 38 grams. That might not be super intuitive to the people you're talking to. So you can also talk about it as about 4 prunes. That's not so much. It's very easy to do every day. But all the same, prunes also vary in size. So you might want to tell them it's about a 1/4 cup. So you've got some options for talking about the serving size to help people visualize what that is and what's going to resonate most with them. And within that 38 grams, that 4 prunes, that 1/4 cup of prunes, it's fewer than 100 calories, and it's a low glycemic fruit with a glycemic index of 29. And as a reminder, low glycemic is anything with a score of 55 or below, so 29 is quite a bit under that. In terms of sodium, fat, and cholesterol-free food, in terms of those nutrients, prunes are naturally free from sodium, fat, and cholesterol. It's also a good source of fiber with 3 grams, and the fiber is split about evenly, half and half, with soluble and insoluble fiber, so that you're not only helping with digestive health, but you're also helping manage glucose levels, clearing cholesterol, and helping with feelings of fullness. And all of that you get for no added sugar, which people may be interested to learn about. There's been such a focus on sugar in the recent years. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the updated nutrition labels is that it does specify natural versus added sugars so that you can really see that when you've got something naturally sweet, it comes in this package, in this bundle with so many other great things versus something that simply has an added sugar, which is something that we want to limit as much as possible for so many reasons. The reason I think of first and foremost is brain health, but so many reasons. And speaking of that nutritious package, we can see here so many vitamins and minerals that are inside prunes, but the one I want to call your attention to is vitamin K, because prunes a serving is 20%. So it's an excellent source of vitamin K. We know the blood clotting benefits, but also there's a role for bone health. Now, the things that are not on the nutrition label that your clients might be interested in are the polyphenol and antioxidant levels in prunes. So a serving of prunes has over 450 milligrams of polyphenols. And once you get above a couple hundred, that's quite a significant source. So it's more than dried blueberries or dried cranberries, which your clients might be interested in because they might be looking to those kinds of dried fruit for antioxidants, and they are all good choices. And so this is just to say that prunes deserve a spot in that choice list for consideration set for high antioxidant fruit. It's also no added sugar, and sometimes it can be hard to find dried berries without the added sugar. So next slide, please. Okay, let us talk about prunes and gut health. California prunes are the original good gut food, and I bet you know why, but I want to share that there may be a little bit more to this story than you think. So we may be thinking about constipation relief. We may already be recommending prunes to our clients for that benefit as a natural whole food way to address that. While addressing that concern, which by the way affects more women than men, you're bundling that in a package with 20 plus vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and fiber. And again, that fiber, that soluble and insoluble fiber, that's providing bulk for the stool, which is aiding also aiding transit time, which helps digestive health. And this might be why a recent randomized clinical trial found that a serving of prunes was actually more effective than psyllium to relieve chronic constipation. About 2.5 additional. Ooh, there's a really fun echo. Cool.
Excuse me, can we just a kind reminder that everyone remains muted so that Maggie doesn't get interrupted. Thank you.
I felt like I was in space for a second, so that was super fun for me actually, but maybe we'll keep it to that instance. So I was talking about the randomized clinical trial, finding that a serving of prunes is actually more effective than psyllium to relieve chronic constipation. I think that's pretty interesting. And chronic constipation, the thing is that more than about 50% of people are not satisfied with their current therapies. And so they are looking for alternatives, for natural ways to address this, and prunes are a perfect fit for that. But now the psyllium and the prunes were fiber matched. So it's not just the fiber. It may be some of these other elements, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, fiber. It may be the sorbitol, which has a mild laxative effect. It may be the polyphenols that also support gut health. And so that is really the key difference between those two variables that were tested in the study. But I found that pretty interesting. Now we're talking about sorbitol and polyphenols, and here's where it gets a little bit more nuanced. We think of them for the reasons I just said, but they're also prebiotics. So they are digested, metabolized by the gut microbiota, and they do support microbiome diversity. And in that way, they are prebiotics. They are beneficial to our gut microbiome health. Gut health is also tied to bone health, according to emerging research. This is an area that we're still learning a lot about, so not too much to share just yet, but this is yet another way that prunes are good for gut health, and from there, may be good for some other health conditions as well. Next slide, please. Prunes also have an effect on satiety and weight management. And I had a lot of fun reading these studies. I read a lot of research and some of it is more entertaining than others, but I gave myself a name for this first study here that showed that prunes can help you reduce cravings for dessert and reduce overall calories. And in my head, the title of the study is Let Them Eat Cake as Long as They've Had Their Prunes First. So in this study, participants were given a balanced snack that was made of bread, low-fat cheese, and then either a serving of prunes or calorie-matched bread, additional bread there. And it was 2 hours after breakfast, 3 hours before lunch. And what happened is when they ate lunch, they were told that they could eat as much as they like. And there was a dessert with lunch. It was a chocolate cake. And what happened was the group that had prunes in their mid-morning snack, naturally, without artificially trying to restrict, they naturally ate 100 fewer calories. And we know that that can really add up over time without feeling restrictive. So that was great. They drank about a half cup more water and they ate less of their dessert naturally. And they reported, so those are the quantitative findings, but qualitatively, they reported feeling just as happy with both snack options. And also the group that ate prunes, on a visual scale, they rated that their hunger was lower and their satiety was also increased. So all positive directions for that. A second study showed that prunes might suppress hunger and promote lower glucose response and maybe even satiety regulating hormones, the ghrelin that is related to hunger. And so in this study, prunes were compared to cookies, and it was the same amount. So it was 238 calories of each. If you're keeping track, that's about 100 grams of prunes, or 10 to 12 prunes. And the group that had the prunes had a lower glucose and insulin response. They qualitatively said that they had higher feelings of satiety, so lower hunger. And we know from the literature that stable blood glucose levels are associated with reduced appetite. There was also a trend towards lower ghrelin levels in the prune group. So the p-value was 0.056. So not quite significant, but right there on the borderline. So this could be a study that could be replicated so that we could confirm those findings. And then from a big picture, these clinical trials are supported by big data from NHANES. So a data dive into data from 13,000, more than 13,000 adults in the United States found that eating more dried fruit like prunes was associated with more nutrients, higher diet quality, lower body weight, lower waist circumference, and in particular, nutrients that are so key for women's health like fiber and potassium, vitamin K, calcium, and some others. Next slide, please. So when it comes to prunes and bone health, this is such a fascinating topic. I know that Leslie Bonsi recently gave a talk on this, which I hope many of you were able to attend. So I'm just going to cover the highlights here. And I think that the main takeaway is that the majority of research suggests that prunes may help slow down bone breakdown. How does it do that exactly? We are still looking into that, but perhaps it's through better absorption of calcium with the help of vitamin K. Perhaps it's those polyphenols acting as an antioxidant and as an anti-inflammatory agent at a cellular level. Minerals, potassium, boron, magnesium, manganese, and copper, we know that those are essential to bone metabolism and maintenance. We've already touched on vitamin K. And then when it comes to polyphenols, 98% of the polyphenols in prunes are hydroxycinnamic acids. And under that category, you've got chlorogenic, neochlorogenic, and caffeic acids. You've also got some flavonoids like rutin and anthocyanins that are going to be supporting those anti-inflammatory and antioxidant pathways. Finally, we know that sorbitol and fiber do positive things in the gut microbiome environment. Next slide, please. So I just talked about some of the reasons and perhaps some of the potential mechanisms for how it's working. Now I want to just share and maybe review for some of you some of the most recent clinical trials and data on prunes and bone health. So starting on the left, one study found that 50 grams or 5 to 7 prunes prevented bone loss and also mitigated fracture risk at the hip, which we know can be so debilitating and really reduce our ability to live independently. And this was in postmenopausal women who were at a higher risk because they have that lower bone density. In another study, 2 different doses, so 5 to 7 prunes or 10 to 12, so at the 50 gram or 100 gram level, prevented total body bone mineral density loss and lowered also a biomarker of bone breakdown. Those were a couple different studies by the same research group that found this benefit. And this third study, it's not listed here, but the dose here was 100 grams as well. So we're all talking about similar amounts of daily prunes, anywhere from 50 to 100 grams. But it found that that daily dose increased bone mineral density in the lumbar spine as well as the ulna bone here and reduced markers of bone turnover versus other dried fruit. And in this particular study, it was compared to a dried apple. So now taking another step back, just bigger picture, a recent review paper found that it may be the polyphenols and the antioxidants that are acting. So we touched on some of the potential mechanisms on the prior slide. And one that I want to spend a little bit more time on are the polyphenols, because this is a newer area of study that may be supporting bone health, because we know, especially as we age, estrogen drops, it upregulates oxidative and inflammatory pathways. So perhaps addressing those may support bone health. More to come. Next slide, please. When it comes to cardiometabolic health, that heart health that we need to be spending more attention to, prunes may support cardiovascular function in a number of ways that you see here on the slide. Now, why is improving microflora on here? This is because a study found that at the same time that total and LDL cholesterol were going down, the gut microbiome was changing. The colonies of bifidobacterium and lactobacillus were going up, which is good. And the colonies of Clostridium perfringens and E. coli were going down, which is also good. Those are the directions that we want them to go. There's also research in HDL cholesterol, increasing, reducing blood pressure, and lowering overall inflammatory markers. Next slide, please. So last but certainly not least, let's talk about healthy aging with a focus on brain health and really why the high polyphenols and antioxidants in prunes may limit neurodegeneration and even reverse some of the effects and improve cognitive function. Now, one of the top questions that I get about the Mind Diet from my community is around specific foods. Can I eat this? Can I eat that? How much? And there's some confusion around foods if they're not specifically outlined in the Mind Diet. But I will always okay and give a green light enthusiastically to a high polyphenol food like prunes. And in fact, there's data to back that up, because since the Mind Diet was originally developed over 10 years ago, it has been adapted to other cultural meal patterns in Korea, China, as well as France. Now, in France, what's interesting is that rather than recommend berries twice a week, like we do in the US, they're looking at total polyphenol load. And so prunes certainly fit into that model and that paradigm. And plus, prunes are part of French cuisine. So that's also why it fits into that. But this was associated with better cognitive function. So if it was the polyphenols alone, that would be enough to recommend adding prunes, particularly because there's so many other women's health benefits. But we also have good animal data, which is what we want before we move on to human data, showing how this might work. So we've got animal data in models of diabetes, high cholesterol, aging, as well as anxiety, showing benefits for spatial memory and learning and fewer anxiety symptoms. So if everyone could just perhaps mute, I think I'm echoing again. Also, slowing down biological aging is another factor here. So a study from February 2024 that was published by the leading researchers who are studying biological aging found that the MIND diet, which is a high polyphenol diet, was associated with overall slower pace of aging, and that is associated with lower risks of dementia and mortality. Now, when it comes to mortality, all-cause mortality and premature death, the diet and mortality relationship, over half, 57%, of that relationship could be explained by systemic, slower aging. When it came to brain health, 27% could be explained through slower biological aging. And why is it lower? The researchers think because the brain has specific needs that might be independent of other organs in the body, and that the brain, because it is so specific and needs specific nutrition, that might be why there are more direct effects for specific nutrients. And this might be why certain heart-healthy diets like Mediterranean DASH will get us most of the way to brain health, but that a diet that is optimized for brain health, the MIND diet is only one approach to this, of course, has stronger effects and stronger benefits when it comes to cognitive health. And so overall, this is going to be so great for our individual independence, public health, as well as our broader society. Next slide, please. So we're about to get into recipes, which is so exciting. So I want to leave you with a recipe of my own for women's health. It starts with a high dose of antioxidants, polyphenols, 3 grams of fiber, a pinch of sorbitol, an abundance of vitamins and minerals, a plethora of prune flavor. You mix it all together, and what do you get? You get a beautiful, delicious serving of prunes. And so I hope that we all enjoy prunes daily and live a long and healthy life. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kristy and Jackie to get into culinary applications. I'm so excited to see this because I know firsthand that prunes are such a gorgeous ingredient to work with in the kitchen. So thank you, and Kristy and Jackie.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I'm just going to switch the spotlight here. We could go to the next slide. Thank you. So I'm just going to review some of the culinary applications of prunes, the flavor profile, different uses for them, and then I'll pass it over to Jackie, who will finish up, and then we'll get into our actual demos. So if you are cooking along with us, now would be a great time to gather your ingredients. Just to let you know, we'll be starting with the with the oats, and then I'll be moving into the teriyaki sauce. Okay, next slide, please. So when we think about prunes, what is their flavor profile? I'd love to know in the chat box if you do cook with prunes, do you normally use them in sweet or savory? And what's your immediate go-to, or do you just eat them as a snack? Just take a moment to answer, and then I'll continue on with the slide and come back to your answers. So their flavor profile is actually sweet and rich. It's somewhat decadent if we think about it in that way. It's complex. It's got notes of plum, of course, also raisin and caramel. It's soft but also chewy. It's smooth on the inside, and can even be described as velvety. And what's really neat about it is that it actually becomes quite juicy when it's cooked or rehydrated. So if you think about something like stewed prunes, or rehydrating them in some kind of broth or a tea. So there's a lot of different opportunities to even change the texture, even if you get them in the dried form. So they're sweet and tangy and earthy, and this makes them versatile for both sweet and savory dishes. So let me take a look at your answers. I just want to repeat some of these for those of you who are watching the recording. So a lot of people, I see snack popping up a lot, sweet cooking, trail mix, a snack, but I want to start incorporating them in cooking, savory and salads, sweetened desserts. Some of you have never cooked with them. That's why hopefully you'll come away with some ideas after today. Someone said a fruit compote, which is a great idea, and mixing them into rice dishes. I love that idea. So I'm seeing a lot of snacks, and they are, snacks, they're great to have as a snack. But we also want to give you some other ideas. Someone said a tagine, and that's a wonderful idea. I love that. It would be beautiful on that. Or a curry. I'll read just one more. Someone said they love, love, love stewed prunes. So we can go to the next slide now. So you can see even just from our audience that there are so many different kinds of recipes that they can be used in. In our previous webinar, we did go over some different savory ideas, and we'll show you some savory applications today. But we wanted to touch on one unique application, which is baking with prunes as a substitute and replacer for certain ingredients if you want to. So prunes really make baking healthy and delicious. They can be a swap for sugar and really make a beautiful natural sweetener. They can be a replacer for eggs. They can reduce the amount of fat if you're trying to reduce saturated fat, for example, in baking, and also add all those nutrients that Maggie just talked about, and also adding that richness and umami flavor, which is the savory part of prunes, that really adds depth to a recipe. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. So one of the ways you can incorporate prunes into baking is through a prune puree. I'm going to be using a prune puree today in the teriyaki sauce, but if you're using them in baking, I'm going to go over some suggestions for swaps. To make a prune puree, because I'm not going to be demonstrating this today, but it's very simple. So you take, the ratio would be 16 ounces, which is about a bag of pitted California prunes, and then combine them with a half a cup of hot water. And the water does have to be hot because this helps soften them. Then just pulse them in a food processor or blender to combine, and scrape down the sides a few times. And you'll see eventually that you get this really smooth puree, which I'll show you a little more closely when I use it. This one's been refrigerated, and it's just pureed prunes. That's it. And this can be stored in an airtight container in your refrigerator for up to 4 weeks. So it's very stable, because you're going to make a large batch when you make this recipe. So you can use it for a lot of different recipes and have it in your fridge on hand. Some swap ideas. We're going to be sending you a resource, so you don't have to commit this to memory or take notes. This is all available in a resource we'll be sending you. But a swap for sugar, you can use prune puree to replace anywhere from 1/3 to half of the sugar in a recipe. You can swap out eggs. To replace 1 large egg, use a 1/4 cup of prune puree. But keep in mind, this will work best in recipes where egg isn't used for the structural integrity necessarily. And this also works best in recipes that call for no more than 3 large eggs. So think about recipes where, sugar and eggs are used for the texture or color, in case of sugar for the sweetness, not necessarily as functional ingredients. And for fat, if you're cutting out saturated fat, you can replace up to half of the butter or oil with an equal amount of prune puree. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jackie. She's going to go over a little bit more detail of how prune puree can be used in different sweet and savory applications, and then how you can incorporate prunes throughout the day.
Okay, everyone. Hi. So I'm going to be talking about different ways that you can use prune puree applications. So they can be used in both sweet and savory applications. You can put them into baked goods. like cakes and brownies and muffins. You can put them into sweet sauces like chocolate, or you can make your own homemade caramel sauce. You could make them into puddings or mousses, parfaits. You could put them into beverages like smoothies. And then for savory applications, there's lots of ways that you can use prunes. So you can put them into burgers or meatballs to give them just a hint of sweetness and again to add some moisture. You can also put them into sauces such as a mostarda. So a mostarda is an Italian condiment that has some sweet notes, fruit, and also some mustard. Barbecue sauce, teriyaki sauce, which Kristy is going to be demoing in a moment, mole dressings, and of course you can also put them in dips as well. Next slide, please. So I just want to share a few ideas of different ways that you can incorporate prunes into your diet throughout the day. So for breakfast, you can incorporate them into your oatmeal or a porridge, which I'm going to be demoing in a moment with my quinoa porridge. You can put them into baked goods, as we mentioned a moment ago, and other beverages like smoothies and energy bites. We did a great recipe in our last webinar with Leslie, and it was her recipe for these delicious energy bites. We're happy to drop the link in the chat box later if you don't have the recipe. It's awesome. Great thing to keep on hand for breakfast or for even a snack. You can certainly put them into your lunch, into salads and sandwiches, into grain bowls. And then for dinner, thinking about incorporating a hint of sweetness in your sheet pan dinners, or putting it into a stewed protein like a casserole, or anything that has a savory sauce, and stews, as well as pasta dishes too. So just a few ideas to get your creative juices flowing. And we'll go to the next slide. So just going to briefly review the recipes that we're going to demo today. Okay, so for the ingredients, we're going to be using quinoa, some light coconut milk, unsweetened almond milk, or you could use another plant milk or regular cow's milk if you like, maple syrup, vanilla extract, cinnamon, a little pinch of salt, almond butter. I'll be talking about other substitutions during my demo, California prunes, and some hemp seeds. And then for the next recipe, can change the slide. For the next recipe, Kristy is going to be showing how to make a low sugar homemade teriyaki sauce using prune puree. So we're going to be using some tamari or soy sauce, orange juice, garlic, ginger, and the prune puree, which she's going to show how to make. And she's going to put that onto salmon, but you could use another protein as well. And she'll be showing how to serve that up. So those are the recipes we're going to be demoing today. And I will get started with my quinoa dish. Okay, so if you're cooking along, in our instructions, we included to already toast your quinoa. So it's really important to rinse your quinoa. There's actually a natural pesticide on the outside of quinoa that can actually cause a little bit of a tummy ache. So it's always good to rinse it. And then I like to toast it to really bring out the nutty flavor of quinoa. So you just do that right in your pan, no oil or anything, just put the rinsed quinoa right in the pan and toast it for about 2 to 3 minutes. Now, the reason why I wanted to do a quinoa porridge in the first place was because I think we're very used to, as dietitians and health professionals, to recommend having oatmeal for breakfast. It provides a nice amount of fiber. It's a complex carbohydrate. But quinoa is actually another great option because it provides actually even more protein and more fiber. So I wanted to show how to make it into like a porridge consistency. So we're using more liquid here. So what I'm going to add is 2 cups of unsweetened almond milk, but you could use any other plant milk that you like, or you could use regular cow's milk if you like. So I'm going to put that right into my pot. And then I'm also going to add in a can of light coconut milk. So the light coconut milk has much less saturated fat than the full fat coconut milk. And the reason why I'm combining both of these milks is because it just brings such nice flavor to this. I didn't want it to be overwhelmingly coconutty, so I'm just using a little bit of the coconut milk and then some of the almond milk as well. And it's a really nice balance of flavors. So we're just going to give that a stir and bring that up to a boil, and then quickly drop it down to a simmer. Now, it can boil over really quickly, so definitely keep a close eye on it. And you can also just open up your lid just slightly so some of this steam can escape if you don't have like a little opening in your lid. So bring it up to a boil, drop it down to a simmer, open up your lid just a little bit if you need to, and then you're going to continue to simmer it and stir frequently for about 20 minutes. So I've already done that, just in the interest of time for this demo. So I already have this cooked. This has been cooking for 20 minutes, so it's all cooked. Now, if it gets a little bit dried out, you can absolutely use a little bit more plant milk and get it a little bit moister if you'd like. And then to this, you're going to add in some additional flavor. You're going to add in 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. You're going to add in some maple syrup, just a tablespoon of maple syrup. If you want to use another sweetener, you certainly could. You could use honey or agave nectar or even stevia, whichever sweetener you like. You could also leave it out if you want to, but just needs a little bit of sweetness and it's really nice. And then we're going to add in a little bit of cinnamon, just a half a teaspoon of cinnamon and a pinch of salt, which I also already have in this dish. And we're going to mix that up. Okay, so this makes 4 servings. So I'm going to plate this up, and this reheats really nicely too. So it's a great make ahead dish for the week. Certainly could also make a double batch if you like. So I'm going to add that into my bowl, and then I'm going to show you how I top that. So I like it kind of thicker, but if you want to get it a little bit thinner, you certainly could. Just use a little bit more liquid. So that is a quarter of the recipe. And now we're going to top it with our California prunes, some almond butter. You could use any other nut butter if you like, and then some hemp seeds. I'm using just whole hemp seeds, but you could use ground flax seeds. You could use chia seeds. You could use some chopped nuts if you like. You can really customize this however you like. So I'm going to top it with my chopped prunes. So this quarter cup is about 5 to 7 prunes. It just depends on the size of the prunes. So we're getting a really nice dose of all those health benefits that Maggie talked about. And then we're going to add in our almond butter. You can just kind of drizzle it around. I like to put it all over. That way I can easily get a spoonful of it in each bite. And then we're going to top it with our hemp seeds. And you can absolutely add a little bit more almond butter or California prunes or hemp seeds if you like. I'll bring this up to my camera so that you can see the finished dish a little bit better. So that is what it looks like. It makes a really nice serving. This is, loaded with nutrients. It's filled with fiber. It's going to keep you feeling really full and energized the whole morning until the afternoon. So I hope you enjoy this recipe, and I will turn things over to Kristy.
Thank you, Jackie. We do see your questions coming in the chat box. I just want to acknowledge that we're not ignoring you. We're just waiting till the end, and we'll make sure we get to them today. And if not, if we don't get to all of them, we'll send out a document that answers all of your questions. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to be doing a teriyaki sauce with prunes. So as Jackie mentioned, this uses prune puree, some tamari or soy sauce, and garlic, ginger, and orange juice. So I'm going to do it a little bit of like cooking show style. I have different stages of it already done, but I'm going to give you, first thing I'm going to do to show you is how to peel the ginger, and then I'm going to switch my camera view so you can see the pot that I'm going to make the sauce in. So to peel ginger, we've shown this before, and you may have seen this in other cooking demos, but the easiest way to peel ginger is actually with a spoon, with the back of a spoon. So you just rub the edge of the spoon on the ginger, and this really causes minimizes waste. If you use a knife, you really peel off a lot of the actual ginger part that you want to use. And you see it just kind of flakes off really easily. So I'm just going to need about a tablespoon of ginger. So I'm not going to peel all of this, but I just wanted to show you that little trick. Okay. Now I'm going to switch my camera view so you can see my pot close up. Okay, so first we're going to add 1/3 cup of tamari or low sodium soy sauce. And this is just a small saute pan. This is a small saucepan. This will make about 1 cup of teriyaki sauce. Now I'm adding 1 cup of freshly squeezed orange juice. And then I'm going to grate 2 cloves of garlic. I like to use a microplane, and I like to do it right over the pot, because then all of the juices from the garlic, and the same with the ginger, just go right into whatever you're making. So I'll just grate this and then tap it. It goes right in, and then I'll do the 2nd clove, and then I'll do the same with the ginger. And this is set to medium. This sauce will be simmering for about 10 minutes. And then I'll show you the finished product. And then I'll do the same with the ginger. So we'll need about a tablespoon. You can eyeball it. It's not a perfect science here. It won't affect the outcome of the sauce other than making it more or less gingery based on your flavor preferences. I like a lot of ginger, so I'm being pretty generous there. And then last but not least, we have 3 tablespoons of prune puree. So this is what I showed you earlier. So this is 3 tablespoons of that recipe that we showed you on the slides. And as it heats, it's going to become thinner, and as it rehydrates in the liquid, so it will all become a smooth sauce. It won't remain clumpy and in chunks like this. So I'm going to let this heat up, and then I'll bring it to a simmer. You can start to whisk it to break up the prune puree. And this, like I said, will simmer for about 10 minutes. And then as it simmers, it will reduce. So as sauces, anytime you're cooking a liquid, like a sauce like this, you want to leave it, and you want to reduce it and make it thicker. You want to leave it uncovered, because if you cover it, then it will the liquid won't be able to evaporate. So you really want the liquid to evaporate and become nice and thick. And then what the finished product will look like is, oh, there's some sesame seeds that snuck in there. Sorry, that's for my finished dish. That, okay. So then we have a nice thick teriyaki sauce. So that's all. I mean, this recipe couldn't be faster. You can make the prune puree, that is a tongue twister, ahead of time. And then whenever you want to, you can make the sauce. It just takes a few minutes. And what I'm going to show you now is how to use this in a salmon preparation. Let me just wipe off my board. So I have my oven preheated to 350. You can also do this ahead of time and, marinate the fish. But right now I just have 1 fillet of salmon. I'm going to switch my camera view so you can see me brushing it on just as that simmers. Clean off my area here. Okay, so I just have my salmon. I'm going to spoon about a tablespoon over the top. And I'm going to be careful of cross-contamination here because I actually want to use this leftover sauce after it's cooked. So I'm not going to dip my spoon back in. You can use a pastry brush here too, but it's about a tablespoon. Oops. I'll brush that on top. And this can, like I said, this can marinate. You can do this with extra firm tofu. I actually did it with tofu the other day, and it works out just as beautifully. And this will bake in the oven at 350 for about 15 minutes. It depends on how thick your salmon is. And then it's done. And we wanted to use salmon today because of its anti-inflammatory benefits with all of the omega-3s. Let me just clean off my board here, and then I'll bring out the cooked salmon and plate it up for you before we finish up. And you can see my sauce is bubbling. This burner got hot quickly, which is fine. We just don't want it to overflow, of course, but it's fine if it bubbles. That's all just the sauce reducing. So I'll pull my salmon out of the oven. So this is what it will look like when it's out of the oven. We just want to make sure, you know, salmon can be a little bit underdone on the inside. Some people like it rare on the inside. That's really up to you. And I have some rice here that I've cooked and blanched some broccoli, excuse me. And I'm just going to plate it on top. So this is a meal that everyone in the family can enjoy. You can use it with different proteins. It's very family friendly. It's easy to prep ahead of time and then just pop in the oven. And then I'll just wipe the plate a little bit. And then I have some sesame, some black and white sesame seeds here that I just wanted to add for some color and texture on top of the rice. And then we can finish it with a little bit of that teriyaki sauce. Get a clean spoon. Just for some extra flavor. And there we go. It's a beautiful lunch or dinner. And now, before we close, we could just pull up the slides again. We just want to take a moment we will be taking some questions. We'll go through those as much as we're able to now. Jackie, I don't know if you've been monitoring those in the chat box or if there were any that came in about my recipe.
There were a couple questions that came in about your recipe, and then there were some other general questions about prunes, which we'll get to. But just real quick, the two questions that came in about your recipe, somebody asked for a substitution for ginger and also a substitution for the orange juice.
I need to think about that for a moment because the ginger won't, I mean, it's really key to the flavor. So it's not going to affect the consistency at all, but I would just say it's important in terms of flavor. So, I mean, you could just leave it out, but it just, you know, won't pack as much of a punch. It won't taste as much like teriyaki. If you or Maggie have any suggestions, I mean, I would amp up the garlic a little bit, probably if you took out the ginger. And then in terms of the orange juice, so it adds some acidity. So I guess you would have to use another juice that's somewhat acidic. So yeah, pineapple juice could probably work. Grapefruit juice would be too tart. Prune juice would make you get extra dose of prunes. I think pineapple would probably work the best. I see someone else suggested that as well.
Yeah, and someone asked if they could air fry tofu with the sauce, and I would say definitely. I think that would
Yes,
be.
yes, definitely. Air fry would be great.
Oh, somebody said pineapple juice. Yeah,
Yeah.
great. All right, go ahead.
Okay. So before we take some questions, we just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And in case you missed it at the very beginning of the webinar, later today we'll be sending out a survey to obtain your CEU certificate. And within 1 week, we'll be sending out a link to the recording of the webinar. You can see here we have references that you'll all be getting in the slides to review all of Maggie's wonderful research that she highlighted. And you're also now on our mailing list, so you'll be in the loop about all of our future events. And our annual conference is coming up in a few weeks. So if you enjoyed today's webinar, be sure to check out our website for more information. And now let's just take a few moments to go through some questions. And then before we sign off, we'll share some additional resources for you. So I know one question that came up, and Maggie, I don't know if you can shed some light on this, was about what the benefit is that the prunes have versus the plums.
Oh, sure. Well, the research uses a pretty high amount of polyphenols, and you get that really from dried fruit. That's really the most practical way to get it. And so that's the key benefit of using the dried versus the fresh, is that you are getting a more concentrated dose of those polyphenols and all the good stuff that is inside prunes.
Thank you. I just have to scroll through some of the questions. Is daily prune consumption a concern with patients on blood thinners due to vitamin K? And I think unless you know something different, that the key is the consistent
Yep.
take. So, as long as they're not having much vitamin K, and then all of a sudden they start eating tons of prunes, I mean, that might be a concern, but the key is to just keep it consistent.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Consistency. And then as you make positive dietary changes, just do that in lockstep with your healthcare team.
Great. Does it make a difference if you use prunes with sorbate versus without?
I do not know the answer to that question. Maybe that's one we can follow up on.
Sure. And there were some comments, I want to get this right, but earlier when you were talking about the natural sugar, I believe someone said in a group they're in that there are frequently comments about the sugar content in prunes.
Yes, I know it. There's
that.
constantly conversation about the sugar in fruit, and it's such a misplaced conversation, which is one of the reasons why we are all here, so that we can help educate around that, so that we can be more reasonable in how we eat. And fruit has sugar, and that is a good thing. What we are trying to avoid is that added sugar. And so I think as much as this group can really keep repeating that until it sinks in the larger consciousness, I think that is one of our important jobs of this decade.
Absolutely. And then with Jackie's recipe, there were just some questions around not using coconut milk and substitutions. You can use any I just want to reiterate, you can use any milk you like. Just, that's just what she chose to use, and we thought it was a great flavor, but you can use anything you like.
Yeah, the light coconut milk has a pretty low amount of saturated fat in it, since it's the light version. But if you're very concerned about saturated fat, you could certainly just use another plant milk.
And then there was just, I'm going to get one or two more questions, sneak them in here. Can you still get the same benefit from prune juice versus the dried version? The studies, to my knowledge, have really been done on the whole prunes and not on the prune juice. Maggie, do you know anything differently? And plus, you're not getting the benefits of the fiber.
The prune juice does have a little bit of the fiber, but some of the soluble fiber, but not as much as the prune. There's research on a couple different forms, but you're right. The majority of the research is on the whole prune.
And then could eating at least 5 prunes daily slow the progression of mineral bone loss?
Oh, what a great question. Yes. So the research is largely using a 50-gram or 100-gram serving, and that 50-gram is that 5 to 7 a day serving. So that is spot on. And that was also really well tolerated in terms of enjoyment and no side effects.
Great. There are a few more questions here. We're happy to stay on a few extra minutes, but for those of you who have a hard stop, you're welcome to leave. This has brought us to an end of the CE activity, and we have shared some additional resources on that last slide for where you're able to review some of the information that we went over on the California Prunes website, and we will be sending that out as well in our email. There will be instructions again for the CEU. Sorry, let me replace my spotlight here. There will be clear instructions on how to get your CEU in an email that we'll send out later today. You'll be receiving a survey. You have to fill out that survey, and then on the last page, there will be a link to download the CEU certificate. The recording and the slides will come, the recording will come within a week. So just don't worry if you don't get our email by tomorrow with the information on the CEU survey, please email us. So that means you may have missed it.
But it will be coming later today.
And we're happy to stay on just to answer these last questions. Okay, so there was one I saw here. Can a person develop an intolerance such as IBS or for prunes? Can you develop? So are you asking, Jean, if you're still here, if you can develop a GI disorder specifically for prunes? If you don't mind clarifying that question. And then there was another question, Maggie, has bone restoration been demonstrated in earlier stages, such as osteopenia? Do you know the answer to that?
Well, the data is in postmenopausal women, so it's not always in the case of osteoporosis. So it is those women that are at a higher risk, but not necessarily full osteoporosis yet. So I would say that the answer is yes. And the references are all in those slides, so you can refer back to those as well.
Okay. Jean just clarified her question. Can IBS patients tolerate prunes?
Ah, I see. Well, I am not an IBS expert, but I would say that you would work with your dietitian on that, and that it's really, individual based. And so it may cause some issues, it may not. I know that that's not a super great answer, but it is so individual. So I would really look to that.
I would agree. Can you substitute for both sugar and fat in the same recipe? That's a little risky, I think. I think anytime you start to do swaps, if you change too much, it really just changes the recipe completely. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. It depends on what you're making and how much you're really tweaking. You could certainly cut back on some of both. It will still. I think you could do both in a modest amount, but in those portions, in those ratios that we recommended. So, you don't want to replace, maybe instead of up to half of the fat, you do a little less. But I think ultimately it's going to come to some trial and error and tweaking and playing around in the kitchen. If you want some additional recipes, definitely go to the California Prunes website. They have a great list of recipes there, and I know they have baking recipes. Are there any other questions that we may have missed?
I think we covered them all, but in the event that we missed a question, please feel free to email us, and we're happy to get your question answered. So our email address is info@culinarynutritioncollaborative.com.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Kristy, do you want to stop? Ah, okay.